politically. This has become and has been kind of a focal point priority issue for Chairman Sanders as he took over from the Help Committee this Congress. And so, now we're seeing those words on a page, those policy proposals actually being floated out and trying to understand the impacts. And I'll say, looking at the House passed product and now this Senate draft sort of in process, there's some, I think, some subtle differences, some striking differences between the two, but then there are also some similarities that you can see some areas of commonality and agreement on the policy side moving forward, so that if we're thinking ahead of how do you sort of reconcile and discuss those differences and similarities into potentially a final product, you can sort of see that path. It's not necessarily a yellow brick road yet, but it's a path. And I would say there's different motivations, both on the House side and the Senate side, but certainly a refrain that every member of Congress hears each, if not every day, each week, is that businesses and employers in their districts and their states are having trouble finding skilled workers to fill jobs that are available. And so that has motivated a lot of these discussions. It's a common sort of problem heard across the country, and has led us to having some of these, again, productive conversations. There were certainly times in the last Congress where I mentioned the House had passed the bill, but the Senate couldn't quite get off the ground and having a discussion around WIOA. So getting to a point where you have a discussion draft, which is now sort of open for input from stakeholders like people on this call, is a significant development, and one that, from a staff perspective, I know that there's a lot of pride of authorship, because they did, as we said, they've made some meaningful changes, some proposals here. And again, I think they're now looking to this community to let them know what, sort of where they got it right, areas which may need some additional input and revisions, and then what the path may look like after that, as we consider this sort of the furthest opportunity we've seen, in those 10 years I mentioned since WIOA was passed, to reauthorization and sort of addressing some of the issues that we've seen within the workforce system as WIOA has been implemented over the last several years.
Thanks so much, Chris. So just to recap, we have a Senate bill that was passed in the spring. We have a House bill that was passed in the spring, a Senate bill that is now in draft form, seeking comments, and presumably might be moving forward to become an actual bill that the Senate would look like. We would need to go through, assuming it passed the Senate, we would need to go through a reconciliation process between the House and Senate bill. They are different, but as you say, have some commonalities, and then potentially up to the White House for signing. So that's sort of the path that we seem to be on. And as Chris has said, and just from talking to others, this seems to be the furthest we've gotten down the WIOA reauthorization road in the last little bit. And so we're leaning in and taking a little more interest in the WIOA process. Let me just walk through a couple of sort of high level things about the bill, and then I'm going to drill down in more substance on the apprenticeship components. What I'm sharing on this slide is stuff that comes directly from the Senate Help Committee staff, the things that they think are really important about the bill. I'm going to walk through those in a little bit more detail, but just these are the kinds of things that Senate staffers seem to be talking about. And actually, if you're somebody who follows WIOA and follows the Republican and Democratic sort of back and forth on WIOA, you can see there's sort of something here for everybody. This is kind of a very, very open bill with lots of different ideas here. So let me just walk through a couple of things that I think are important to bear in mind for the bill as a whole. First off, the training partnership list, the approved training partnership list, or the ETPL, has been a point of contention in the current WIOA system. The Senate bill would introduce something called the Workforce Innovation, I forget what the L is, level something.
Leaders.
Leaders, that's it. Thank you. That is intended to represent sort of leading folks on the ETPL, a way of sort of highlighting best performing ETPL participants. There's been a lot of call for WIOA to think about ways of being more streamlined in getting money to the states. And so there's an allowance for a consolidated, not called block grant, that would represent WIOA funding going to a small group of states and to regional consortia, a way of sort of experimenting with new ways of getting money to the states. There's an opening for states to reconsider the local areas. That's the areas that workforce boards are organized around. And there's I think a broadly held sense that there's a need to kind of revisit some of those boundaries. And so this bill creates some opportunities for that. The local and state workforce boards are now required to have some representation from HBCUs. There's a variety of changes to performance metrics and data gathering. There's an allowance for virtual one-stops. These are the centers that people come to get services under WIOA. There's now an allowance under certain conditions for folks to go to virtual one-stops. Importantly, for Apprenticeships for America, that's very interested in pay for success funding models for apprenticeship, there's an allowance for performance incentive funding for programs supported under WIOA. That's interesting and new. There's some new flexibility allowed for workforce boards who are interested in looking at supporting incumbent worker training and transitional jobs. Again, potential crossovers with folks who are working on apprenticeship. Again, because of our interest in pay for success has been one of the research topics that the bill calls out for the Department of Labor to pursue in its research agenda. And then a couple of sort of new aspects of programming, a new reentry employment opportunities program, national program that would be designed to provide grants in support of returning citizens. A new emphasis on digital literacy skills in the adult literacy and education title of the bill. There's new requirements that adult literacy and Perkins be more closely coordinated. And then for those of us who have been laboring under the sense that WIOA is wildly underfunded, there is, I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but the funding authorization is given as such sums as may be necessary, which at least reduces the cap that WIOA was operating under and maybe creates an avenue for enhanced funding for WIOA. So that's sort of the big picture. And I'm going to, as not a WIOA expert, although I think Chris could opine on any of these if you have questions, we're really going to focus more on sort of the apprenticeship components of the WIOA Senate proposed bill. Let me just note for context, the House bill, as it was passed, I think has 5 references to apprenticeship in it, and none of them particularly substantive. This bill has over 100 and some references to apprenticeship, just if you did the word count. So a lot more here around apprenticeship. And I would sort of group the apprenticeship connections into 3 buckets. The first is a desire to really integrate apprenticeship more deeply into the public workforce system under WIOA. The second is looking at how to incorporate apprenticeship in sort of operational and funding aspects of WIOA. And then the third is a new national funding program called the Youth Apprenticeship YARG, the Youth Apprenticeship, oh God.
Readiness.
Readiness grants, Youth Apprenticeship, YARG, Youth Apprenticeship Readiness Grants. We can all talk like pirates and use the word YARG. Okay, so let's just walk through those one by one. And if you have a question and you don't want to forget it, put it into the chat, and Renee is going to help us come back to it as we get to the Q&A section. So just on integration, this is sort of at the level of administrivia or bureaucracy, but bureaucracy matters in government programs. And so WIOA plans now require a description of the availability of apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs in the state. So there's now an effort to sort of bring the planning aspects to bear on apprenticeship. There's also a provision now that apprenticeship coordination and promotion are now included in the allowable statewide activities of WIOA. So states are putting together their plans and thinking about how they're spending state level money. Coordinating and promoting apprenticeships is now on that list. Local boards are now required to include the representative of an apprenticeship program on a new required standing committee on the workforce. Those standing committees, I think, it feels to me, just having read the draft bill, a little bit of a work in progress, but there's at least some desire now to see apprenticeship represented some way in the formal governance system of local workforce boards. Local plans, just like the state plans, now need to reference apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship availability. And apprenticeship is now recognized as an allowable activity for both the business services function of a local workforce board, as well as Job Corps programs that are funded under WIOA. And while we've seen, some Job Corps, I would say mostly experiment with connecting to apprenticeship, that's not been a sort of formal connection that we've seen a lot of. So maybe now sort of more opportunity in that space. So you can see there's really a desire here to bring apprenticeship sort of more into the house of the public workforce development system. So that's all very good for sort of organizing yourself, but what does it actually mean on the ground? And how does this actually play out operationally in the WIOA system? The first is in the ETPL, the list of approved employment and training providers for a local workforce board. No change in the existing provisions that say that registered apprenticeship programs are included on the ETPL, but now added to that is that youth apprenticeship programs, you can see here, providers of pre-apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship programs that serve youth are now also automatically added to the employment and training provider list. In the area of youth programming, apprenticeship is now included as part of the definition of work-based learning. And really importantly, WIOA youth formula funding, 10% of it must now go towards youth apprenticeship activity. I think it's youth apprenticeship activity that might include pre-apprenticeship activity. And then finally, I just want to say that apprenticeship is named as an eligible activity for some of the grant funds that are going to be that would be put out under the Senate version of WIOA's reauthorization, including these national reentry grants that would be made to support employment and career advancement for returning citizens. And then at the state level, two new funding efforts are now described in the bill as optional for states that they can use up to 10% of their funds to support. One is called a sector partnership development funding program or fund, and the other is called an employer-based training activity fund. So these are two funds which optionally governors, states may set up and may use WIOA funds to support, and those grants may be used to support apprenticeship in different ways. And then I want to just spend a couple of minutes on this Youth Apprenticeship Readiness Grant. program. So this is a national grant-making program. I want to acknowledge that many of the ideas, I would say most of the ideas for this program come from a bill that Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado had introduced and has been sort of incorporated into the WIOA bill. This would be set at $65 million annually to be funded from H-1B funds. You can see the goal here, increase youth participation. It provides grants to partnerships that include a wide array of stakeholders who can advance youth apprenticeship, high schools, community colleges, employers, nonprofits, state agencies, other intermediaries. It's intended to be used to support both in-school youth and the what used to be called out-of-school youth, but is now called opportunity youth in the WIOA Senate draft. And there is a desire that in looking at these proposals that the Department of Labor would prioritize areas where there are workforce shortages, use data and proven success to select recipients, that priority would be given to serving low-income communities, and that there would be a high-need educational agency engaged in the partnership in one way or another. Let me just say two other sort of things around the YARG. The first is that the federal contribution would require a 25% match from a non-federal source, but that match may be in cash or in kind. I suspect there needs to be some more sort of definition around some of that, but that's one of the ideas. And then you can see the allowable uses, pre-apprenticeship programming, apprenticeship programs that serve youth. And you can see here registering for such a program, or getting youth engaged into youth apprenticeship programs. In just a second, I'm going to give you some definitions for how the Senate bill thinks about defining pre-apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship. Here we go, definitions. So this is really critical because in the rules on apprenticeship and in the National Apprenticeship Act, there really isn't any discussion of what pre-apprenticeship means or what youth apprenticeship means. So this act would really set forth some of the first definitions in law in terms of what these programs, what these definitions mean. So you can see youth apprenticeship, an apprenticeship program registered by a state apprenticeship agency, so it needs to be registered, that is designed for youth not younger than the age of 16 or older than 24. So 16 is a limit that comes from our National Apprenticeship Act rules, but 24 would be a cutoff in terms of what is considered youth apprenticeship. And then the pre-apprenticeship activity that's described here is intended to prepare youth to enroll in and complete an apprenticeship program, I should say a registered apprenticeship program. It articulates to a registered apprenticeship program that serves youth, and there's some special considerations for any program that's working with in what's called a hazardous occupation. So I won't go into the details on that, but there's a lot of language on it. There are a couple other definitions that are really critical here, and again, as an organization that deals with apprenticeship intermediaries, this is once again sort of one of the first places in law that an apprenticeship intermediary is defined. But before we get there, let me just describe who could receive these YARG grants. It could be an education and training provider, a workforce development system entity, a qualified intermediary, or a state agency in the state. And there's some requirements for partnership. You can see some of the kinds of organizations that are required partners. And then there's some possibilities of additional partners. You can see the kinds of organizations and stakeholders that are listed in this group. So you may be asking yourself, well, what exactly is this qualified intermediary? Well, I'm glad you asked, because the Senate bill has some language on this. So this is a nonprofit entity that demonstrates expertise in serving populations, employers, and schools by, and then there's now a long list of different things that are part of that requirement. And then it may consist of a labor management organization, a community-based organization, or industry association. And I suspect this is an area where Apprenticeships for America is going to have a couple of ideas that we're going to want to share, and would love to have your thoughts and feedback on this. So I'm going to stop there, and maybe we should just take some questions, and then here I'm going to stop the share, and then I'd like to come back with some specific questions that will help guide AFA's response to the Senate Help Committee. So Renee, do you want to walk us through some of the questions that have come up in the chat?
Hey, sorry, I'm back. Well, one question was asked, which is a little bit more procedural and administrative for you, is will this PowerPoint be made available to
oh yeah, thanks. I'm sorry. Yes, two things. One is there will be a recording of this webinar put up on YouTube by the end of the week, and yes, we'll absolutely send out a copy of this PowerPoint. So apologies, I should have said that right up front.
That's fine. So what I'm noticing here is we have a little bit more of conversation than questions, but there have been some comments about a lot of pre-apprenticeship programs that have no ties to apprenticeship opportunities, and making sure that the pre-apprenticeship programs are all valid. And one person said it, and 9 other people gave it the big, actually, that's not true. 10 other people gave it the big thumbs up, and 2 other folks verbally said that. So I don't know if there's any comment there from you, John, or you, Chris, about any tighter definitions of what is pre-apprenticeship, or what should be pre-apprenticeship.
So, and in fact, let's open this up to the group, because this is one of the areas we really want to get into. I think we've all seen a lot of kind of ordinary train and pray workforce development programming sort of rebranding as pre-apprenticeship, and I think we would want to try and distance ourselves from that kind of activity. Todd, do you want to offer a thought on this?
Yeah, Todd's got his hand up.
Thank you. Todd Birch, President of the National Association of State and Territorial Apprenticeship Directors. Thank you for having me today. I'm speaking on behalf of my 32 states and territories that are not run by the Office of Apprenticeship. That being said, as my opening statement, Training and Employment Notice 23-2023 specifically states have purview over pre-apprenticeship. Myself and my colleague directors throughout the country have it in statutes in many of our states defining exactly what pre-apprenticeship is, in alignment with the old Training and Employment Notice 13-12. That being said, it has no opportunity or leads, just like an AP program for a high school kid. If you're taking AP classes, it's supposed to go towards classes of a degree. That being said, the same thing for pre-apprenticeship. Let it count for something. This training and praying has to stop. It's been a grab for a lot of organizations. It leads nowhere. It has to be validated by the SAAs until OA finally comes around to give it a proper definition of pre-apprenticeship. And that being said, it is also our position, and I hate to take this time, it's also our position, there's no silos. There's apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship, that's it. Youth apprenticeship is a siloed attempt of pre-apprenticeship. That being said, that is also defined in some states, but pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, leave it at that, and let's go forward and give opportunities to people and employers throughout the country.
Todd, thanks for sharing that. I think there is definitely a fault line that this bill walks around designating a youth apprenticeship. And I think it will be helpful for this group to have to help inform our take on that. So thank you for all of that. Also, Todd, can I just note for follow-up, I would love to talk with you about how we might square the circle around states' definitions of pre-apprenticeship and the effort of this bill to define pre-apprenticeship, and how we can sort of finesse that. So we can take that offline, but I'd love to talk with you about that.
Yeah, well, we're glad to. My executive board and I are glad to have that conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Todd. Other thoughts or reactions to this question of how we define pre-apprenticeship and what kind of feedback we could offer to the Senate on that? Anyone?
I just would like to agree wholeheartedly with Todd. I think we see similar things in our state where there's a lot of youth, and I say that loosely with a quote, apprenticeship that leads really nowhere or takes so incredibly long that those kids won't be ever get through it. Well, maybe not ever, but very few will get through it.
Thanks, Claire. Claire, where are you from?
Indiana.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire.
Sure.
Liz Busarczyk?
Yes, good afternoon, good morning, thank you.
Liz, did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah, that was good. That was great.
Okay.
I'm in Pennsylvania, and we do have a state definition of pre-apprenticeship. And I think one thing that we also acknowledge and discuss is that pre-apprenticeship is not just for young people. It's actually the preparation to get into an apprenticeship. So thinking of someone who is mid-career, going from, something very different of an industry and experience and trying to get into something very new where they have zero or minimal experience. And so how do we develop, and I guess, in a sense, pre-apprenticeship is training, right? It's not paid work experience necessarily. It could have that component. It would be great to see that be more of like a heavy requirement to get these people some kind of funding while they're in training, right? But the idea is that they are then having the opportunity to complete and go into an apprenticeship. The other big piece that we see, which is a challenge, is that the number of slots for an apprenticeship is pretty minimal, whereas you'll have 20 or 30 people in a cohort for pre-apprenticeship. And so how is that really equitable? Depending on the industry, depending on the occupation. So that's a big disservice that we see. And so it really does model potentially other traditional training programs on the ETPL, where you go into training, you're paying the costs through WIOA or out of pocket, but it doesn't necessarily lead you to a job because the number of openings aren't necessarily there, or potentially there's the process for applying doesn't get you past that interview or something to that effect. So just wanted to add that to the pre-apprenticeship conversation.
That's excellent. Thanks, Liz.
There was some concern about lopping together pre-apprenticeship with youth apprenticeship and there being a distinction there.
So let's come back to that. I want to just take two comments that are, Bob, do you want to jump in here? Oops, you're muted.
No, just that something very simple, that the Senate people need to be informed that the biggest constraint, and I've said it 100 times, but sometimes repetition is valuable, that the biggest constraint in expanding apprenticeship is getting employers to offer apprenticeships. And kidding ourselves that having a that comment was right spot on. Kidding ourselves that you can have a real pre-apprenticeship program without being pretty sure that at least a big chunk of the pre-apprentices that get through the program have a really good shot at entering the apprenticeship program. It shouldn't be called a pre-apprenticeship program.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. Shonda?
I guess my experience with pre-apprenticeships is just to ensure it's not a legislative money grab, that a high quality pre-apprenticeship is also attached to a registered apprenticeship program with a registration number that follows 29 CFR 29 and 30. That goes the same for our youth registered apprenticeships. They are two vastly different things. And youth registered apprenticeships also have to follow into a regular registered apprenticeship opportunity or have the opportunity to complete a certification, again, under 29 CFR 29 and 30. The two are dedicated to vastly different audiences. We're finding a lot of success with pre-apprenticeship programs that are leading to registered apprenticeship programs for people that are just as involved. really rural areas that don't have a lot of opportunity, and people that are between the ages of 16 to 35, 38, something like that. And then a youth registered apprenticeship obviously would be its own siloed difference, because it also would follow those exemptions for child labor laws and those OSHA exemption opportunities. So as of right now, Kansas does not have its quote unquote own definition for pre-apprenticeship. We are a state apprenticeship agency, but instead we follow specifically the TEGLs and the TENS that U.S. Department of Labor has put out on quality pre-apprenticeship programs and quality youth registered apprenticeship programs. So I just wanted to make sure that you got the Kansas specific perspective. We also have some USDOL competitive funding that we are investing in 3 of our local workforce boards, 2 of which that now have stood up as a registered apprenticeship intermediary, and then 1 that's in the process of doing that. One of them is dedicated to just specifically youth registered apprenticeship programs, and they will be serving registered apprenticeship programs not only in Kansas, but also on the Missouri side, specifically in the construction and trade sectors, as well as developing out into some other sectors as well. And those programs, again, follow what the USDOL has put out on high quality youth registered apprenticeship programs.
Shonda, could I ask you, we appreciate you sharing that and what's going on there. How do you feel that works? Do you feel like, is there anything there that you might do differently to optimize, or you think it works very well?
What works very well?
You've been describing the process as it goes, as the considerations as it goes in Kansas, and I'm just wondering.
I mean, we're in the
how you feel about it.
Yeah, we're still in the process of modernizing our apprenticeship system. It was fairly well broken several years ago, and we've been in the process of completely redeveloping it over the last 2-3 years. We have a strong strategic plan. We have a strong vision and mission statement. We've completely revamped our standard operating procedure. We've revamped our Kansas Apprenticeship Council, which USDOL views as a advisory council, but we view them as a regulatory council. So they do approve all of our registered apprenticeship programs, which is something that is very important to us. And so, we're a work in progress. We're happy and willing to bring on anyone who has some ideas or would like to work and operate in the state of Kansas. We've opened up our doors. We had the first major initiative where we brought in, I think, 12 different federal funding intermediaries, as the USDOL calls them, intermediaries, all coming in to talk to businesses and industries and chambers and unions in the Kansas City area. That's first time anything like that has ever happened. So I think the more you become transparent with what you're trying to do and intentional about what you're trying to do and engage those important stakeholders that really want to see this succeed across your state, I think it goes really well. Is it easy? No. Is it the right thing to do? Absolutely. Happy to talk with any of you, with anybody at any time. So
Thank you so much.
Yep, I put our website up there. I'm really proud of what we've done with the website. It's very engaging. And anybody who wants to reach out to us, just email that apprenticeship@ks.gov email account. We've got 7 different people who watch that email account. And if you want to talk to me specifically, I'll get the email right away.
Thank you for sharing all that, Shonda. And I noticed a number of resources are going into the chat. We're going to look at all of them. So thank you. If anyone has a good example of a articulation agreement or language around articulation agreements between pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship, it'd be great to, if you can share those in the chat, or at least just put down your name, contact me, and we'll get in touch with you on that. It'd be great to have some models to work from on that. Any any other questions? So we've been digging into this apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship definition and youth apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship definitions. Any other comments before we thank you so much, Todd? I will follow up with you on that. Any other comments on that before we move on to a couple of other questions before we break here? Excellent. I would like to, I'm going to go back to sharing if I can. I have to figure out how to do that. Because I'd like to get the group's opinion of the definition of an intermediary that would be operative for the YARG grant. So if I can, let me just, sorry. So this is the definition of a qualified intermediary. AFA has been looking at this pretty closely just because it's the first time we've actually tried to put sort of apprenticeship and intermediary together in law, and we think that's a really important and potentially precedent-setting moment. So we're very interested in any feedback or reactions you have to this definition of a qualified intermediary. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I have.
Get us started here, Bob.
Yeah, my first thought, it should include for-profit entities that are doing a good job. I mean, and certainly some of the intermediaries that DOL has already funded are for-profit entities. And that organizational form doesn't tell you whether the organization does a good job or not a good job. The second thing is the serving as a program sponsor. Well, first of all, I guess all these lists of things, it seems to say or. So I assume that an intermediary could be one of those and would then qualify as an intermediary. The third thing is that, at least in the UK, for example, and I believe in other places as well, the qualification of what they call their form of intermediaries is looked at in terms of also their record and their performance. So, they could be, they might want to have, of course, you may not have performance yet. You may have worked on the workforce in other ways, but not performance in apprenticeship. So it might be that there would be a kind of probationary qualification and then a subsequent qualification. So Todd, something here. Yeah. Not Excellent. Sure what you mean, Todd. I'm not sure what you mean, but.
What I mean is that just having an intermediary being a sponsor does not relieve the employer's responsibility. They also must abide by 29, 29, and 30. It's just not an intermediary saying, hey, I'll do all the paperwork for you. That employer's on the hook too. It's very, very paramount to success.
Yeah. No, I wasn't disagreeing with that at all, but I think what we at AFA have long felt is that intermediaries can play, as state agencies can also play, but we need all hands on deck to play the role of really stimulating more employer slots.
Shonda, you had your hand up. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. So one of the biggest things that we had to completely change how we were operationalizing was that the Kansas Office of Registered Apprenticeship does not define what other people's relationships look like. It's never a good idea, I believe, when government, state government, national government, whatever, federal government comes in and says, this person has to work with this person and this person has to work with this person. As long as the program that's being brought to us for registration within the Kansas Office of Registered Apprenticeship meets minimum federal law, I have a duty to send that up to our council for review of approval. Whoever that multi-employer intermediary sponsor wants to work with, or whoever that employer wants to work with, it's best dependent on or decided on them. So coming in with these other, nonprofit, for-profit business structures, I think is going to decimate how this operationalizes and moves forward. I also think that it doesn't take, it takes away some of the respect due to how the Joint Apprenticeship Training Councils also operationalize a lot of what they're doing. So I think there's some of the things in here that are not bad. They're a good idea. Sustainability obviously is great. When we work with our sub-awardees on some of our grants, or we even award out funding from our state funds to JATCs or intermediaries, a component of that is you need to be able to be sustainable. This funding is basically a leveraged funding. It's funding to get you going. It's not funding to keep you sustained over the long term. You've got to come up with your own sustainability model. And at the end of the day, registered apprenticeship is all about relationship building. So if an intermediary can bring the right diversifications and needs and tools that a business needs, the business needs to choose whether or not they're going to work with them or not. Defining that business structure is a bad idea.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. Other reactions on the apprenticeship intermediary definition in the YARG grant idea? All right. Let me, we've got about 12 minutes, 11 minutes to go before we get to, I'm sorry, Adele. Oh, hey, Adele, great to see you. Adele, please jump in.
Yeah, I think one of the things to think about in this, and is this definition is related to WIOA funding. Like, I think thinking about the context of this definition is really important. Like, if this draft were to be coming out of DOL and like administered by DOL, I would weight it in a different way than the context of a qualified intermediary in the context of WIOA funding. Like, you have to think about the context of WIOA funding and what WIOA funding goes towards, and sort of the history of that, and like, so I just to be real, I feel like going to the WIOA audience to say this should go to for-profit partners, it's probably not going to land well. Like, now to DOL, I think a lot of the conversation that we're having is a really good, robust conversation. And I think that like it belongs in the plate of an Apprenticeship Act reauthorization, not maybe just to be realistic about like the comments that are likely to like land and get traction. Like, what we're talking about here is who can get funded by WIOA, right? And so I think that it makes a lot of sense to me that what they're putting forth is saying only nonprofits, like sort of that framing of a WIOA qualified apprenticeship intermediary is going to be different than what we might want and expect from a DOL defined apprenticeship intermediary. So I just wanted to like put that out there. And it's also like, it's exciting that there's some definition being put out there. So like we'll take the iteration on trying to get it pinned down.
But isn't this intermediary definition related to the YARG grants? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah, but that's
so in that
funded.
sense,
Yeah, it's
in that
funded
sense,
by
it's
WIOA.
sort of, well, it's funded, but I think he's trying to draw on a new source with not the standard WIOA funding. I think, isn't he trying to draw on the H-1B dollars for the 65 million?
Yes.
So, I mean,
Interesting.
whether to put it in WIOA was just seems like more of a vehicle that he thought might get through, rather than having something to WIOA embedded relative to apprenticeship embedded.
Yeah.
Anyway,
The legislative calendar simply offered this as the vehicle. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right on that, Bob. Lauren, and then we're going to move on to one last thing before we break here.
So, Adele made some really good points. And again, I may be looking at this only from the USDOL standpoint, but the definition of intermediary, there is sort of this understanding that the intermediaries selected by the US Department of Labor are paid through contracts, and that those contracts allow those people to offer services for free to their to all the stakeholders. One of the things that really becomes concerning to me is when outside intermediaries begin charging fees and creating sort of a mess, for lack of other words, in the system, and offering information only to get that payout. And I bring this up because there are lots, I would say like 90% of the people we work with, they're absolutely there for the right reasons. But then we have these folks that sometimes slip in and their only purpose is to make $1 on a government program. And I just want to be sure that we recognize the reason we recognize or qualify whatever we do, whether it's states or the US Department of Labor, why we recognize these intermediaries is because they've been vetted and they've been, they've gone through a process. I feel like this definition may leave just a little squeak of a hole for some nefarious folks that want to just make $1 to squeak on through. And that's all I'm really going to say. But that is one of the things about intermediaries that's understood. When you have an intermediary from a federal agency, they generally are providing free services through contracts with the department.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Really appreciate those comments. So I want to just ask one sort of one more question for feedback. So in this act is or proposed bill would be an effort to sort of get closer connection between the workforce system and apprenticeship practice, sort of more generally. Variety of different ways that the bill sort of suggests that. Are there any feedbacks or reactions to that? Any of those that seem like they might be a problem, or they might create unintended consequences that we should be careful about? Or on the other side, are there other kinds of integrations that we ought to try to propose or suggest for the Help Committee? It would be helpful for me to put up the slide that has here, I can do that.
I mean, one key thing that could be looked at, which I've proposed many times, is to have some technical training or support for the business services people who are out there, as job developers, to gain more expertise on apprenticeship developers, so that if the WIOA business services people, and it looks as if they can use money for that. So Todd said something, I missed it, but
Todd, you're in rare form today. Thank you for offering all your thoughts. That's great. So, but there is something about making about how do we make the system sort of better better equipped to do this work. That's great, Bob. Adele, and then, oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, and then Adele.
I was just going to say, one of the unintended consequences kind of goes along with what Lauren was talking about. And it's, the more people that are kind of in this space with maybe not the technical assistance that Bob recommended, which is going to be critical. We operate a lot of business solutions with WIOA, and there's just varying levels of understanding about apprenticeship and about, what to do next. So I think the level of integration and the level of the relationships are going to have to strengthen, or we're going to have a lot more potentially unintentional misinformation going out and creating more confusion for the employers.
Apologies to you, Sandra. We're going to take one last comment from Adele, and then we're going to actually wrap it up. Adele?
I just want to say, I just want to really appreciate you all for putting this together and appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. So thank you for synthesizing just a massive policy piece here. I think a few things that are just initial thoughts and reactions. I think it's great because mostly what I'm seeing in here is inserting apprenticeship as a possibility. And, we want you to be speaking to this and having representation in this, in your funding, in your boards, in your plans, all those things. So I feel like that's a really great direction. I think one of the things I've been fearing, I'm not seeing in here, but I want to just flag it. I've heard that the data collection had the possibility of going in the direction of saying oh, we should make sure that we're getting all the same data in apprenticeship as we're getting in WIOA. And I'm no, please don't do that. But I'm not seeing that. So I think that's good, but I just want to flag that in case in your more thorough reading, you did see that somewhere. That would be an area. And I think there's some comments about that in here too. And so I think it's going in a good direction in that sense. And I think the final thing that was also in the comments that I'm sure we would love to all talk about is this has to be squared with the proposed rulemaking by DOL. There's yet a different definition of youth apprenticeship put for CTE apprenticeship. I just these things can't operate independently. They have to operate together. And I didn't hear any of that. And so I know it was in the chat, but I just wanted to give voice to it because all these different definitions of youth apprenticeship are floating around out there. And it feels like a high stakes thing. And I appreciate that there's an opportunity here to insert something, but it's also it's a little weird that youth apprenticeship may be happening as a definition under a WIOA reauthorization. And I saw all the required partners in there of you need an education partner, but if you're doing high school youth apprenticeship, you got to have the Department of Education in the mix here. Saying that youth apprenticeship belongs only under workforce and WIOA, that doesn't work. And so I think that might just be an area of feedback to emphasize that you got to do this with the other partners. You can't do this independently.
Thanks so much, Adele, and thank you everyone for comments, both verbally and in the chat. Very much appreciate your feedback here. Just very quickly in terms of wrapping up. So first off, we'll be following up with an email that'll have the deck. It'll have a link to a YouTube video that is this thing. And then also we're going to share, if you want to comment directly to the Senate Help Committee, there is a process for doing that. Of course, we'll be taking this and synthesizing this into a comment, but if you have the energy and appetite to get something together by July 5th, have at it, and we'll give you the mechanisms for doing that. I want to just let you know a couple of things that are on deck. So we haven't forgotten about the notice of proposed rulemaking. As some of you may have heard, or you may have seen in the newsletter, that has moved to a final rule status. That is not a public final rule, so we don't know what's in the public rule. And we are continuing to track and monitor that. I was actually contacted by a reporter, Adele. I said exactly the same thing, that we have some superseding events here that it seems like moving fast on these rules might not be a good idea, but we'll see. We're also tracking that the Department of Education may be doing a Perkins rule revisit, and that is something we'll be looking at. We are going to be continuing to track this WIOA process, and we'll keep you apprised on that. And then I do want to just let you know a couple of things that are coming up. We will shortly have a Save the Date out on a conference to happen in 2025, our second annual Apprenticeship Summit for Apprenticeships for America. So watch that. And then a really excellent research report coming out in the next month that's looking at community colleges and apprenticeship. Bob Lehrman, our board chair, was an amazing author on that report. 18 case studies from around the country on community colleges doing this work. So stand by on a national webinar that'll be presenting that research report and opportunities to go deeper in that report in the months ahead. Again,
John,
I want to thank everyone. Oh, yeah. So, yep.
Make sure to save the chat.
Yeah, I definitely will. So thanks everyone for participating. Great to have you on this call. We'll stay in touch on this and other important issues as they affect apprenticeship. Bye-bye now. Oh, and also, again, pro tip, anyone who wants to hang out for a couple of minutes, I'll hang out with anyone who has any thoughts they want to share offline